Hello, you're watching news from Kazakhstan. It is Thursday, October 11th. I am Nurbek Savitakhunov. Atyrau city resident is sentenced to 10 years in prison on charges of terrorism. The Attorney General's office says Aidos Kosanov was charged with organizing and managing a terrorist group, financing terrorism, and illegal acquisition and possession of firearms.
According to the investigation, Kosanov, a Salafi follower, has been in contact with Aktobe native Kudaybergenov and was getting funding for financing terrorists in Pakistan. In particular, he acted as an intermediary in the transfer of $2,500 to the international terrorist organization Soldiers of the Caliphate that took responsibility for the attack in Atyrau last year. The activity of the organization is banned in Kazakhstan.
Former Zhanauzian orphanage residents go on a hunger strike in an attempt to obtain their legally provided housing. Due to a lack of registration, the orphans are unable to obtain a full-time job, which leads to other issues in their personal lives, say the young men and women.
10 alumni announced the hunger strike, although there are almost 500 people in the similar situation, says Ruslan Davletgaliyev. He graduated in 2009 and since then lives in rented apartments. After he realized that the authorities aren't going to help, Ruslan appealed to various state organizations, but was always met with doors shut to his face, which prompted him to choose hunger strike as his last resort. We don't have any other choice but to die. If they don't treat us as people, although we don't demand anything that we aren't supposed to have by law, we will have to die. Reporters asked the city administration for comments and were told that officials do plan to provide 40 orphanage alumni with housing before the year's end. As of today, there are 76 people on the official list, and more than half of them will live in the new building constructed by an oil company, said Zhanauzian Mayor Sirik Baytrumov. It was also revealed that the orphanage in question was in fact closed earlier this year. According to city administration, it will be merged with similar facilities in Aktau, while its premise in Zhanauzian will be used as a business center. You can say this was the city administration's initiative. Also, don't forget that the orphanage is under the jurisdiction of the city's education department, and we jointly decided to move it to the regional capital. There is only one goal: to provide kids with better opportunities, which can be done at the regional center, which has theaters, good music schools, etc. And we hope that children will use their time in Aktau for better.
In the latest news, Vladimir Kozlov's wife, Aliya Turzbekova, was granted first visitation rights after his sentencing on Wednesday, October 10th. According to Aliya, the politician convicted to 7.5 years on charges of inciting social hatred is in good spirits. He is held in the same cell as previously, and the couple's conversation lasted 10 minutes, and Vladimir Kozlov's last message to the outside world was gratitude to all those who support him morally. Said Aliya, it is very important to him at this moment.
Of course, it is horrible to be imprisoned, especially when you feel that everything was done right, when white is labeled black, and when it's simply impossible to prove innocence under given circumstances. I told him that everyone supports him, including international organizations. When he's out there in isolation, all alone, of course, such care as support of friends and family means a lot. There is also little hope that the appeals court will acquit him, but we must go through this. We must try it.
The German government's Commissioner for Human Rights, Markus Leuning, is calling on Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev to pardon the convicted politician. As reported by Deutsche Welle, Leuning, who personally visited Aktau and Zhanauzian, noted that Kozlov fought for the rights of oil workers and his activities were within the legal framework. Said the ombudsman, the state must protect political activity and not persecute it. Moreover, chairman of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Riccardo Migliori, expressed concern over the verdict as well. He noted that violations were recorded over the course of the trial, and the politician may have received an insufficient amount of time to prepare his defense.
The verdict was preceded by a non-transparent investigation and a trial which failed to correspond to international standards. The only conclusion is that the verdict and ensuing strict sentence is a warning to the opponents of Kazakh authorities.
Vladimir Kozlov's sentencing was also discussed at the European Parliament in Brussels. Peter Boris reminded his colleagues that the convicted politician was a frequent guest at their sessions and that he was put in prison in part due to talking about his home country abroad.
Boris told European Parliament members that he was a witness at the trial over Kazakhstan opposition leader and called to his colleagues to appeal against the ruling. The parliamentarian supported Boris and decided to write a letter to Kazakhstan authorities regarding Kozlov, also concluding that the EU must force Kazakhstan to fulfill its democratic reforms obligations. When Kozlov came to the European Parliament, he spoke of human rights and freedom of speech, saying that development of Kazakhstan should be peaceful and gradual, and that it should be an evolution process. That is why we invited him to the Euro Parliament. I came here to find out whether government statements on peaceful and transparent problem solvings are true. It seems to me that the people who were protesting had the right to voice their opinions and share their views. The problem is that local authorities fail to resolve those problems.
Following Peter Borish's speech, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Policy, Catherine Ashton, made her statement on the verdict in the case of the insiders. She called the sentence disproportionate, having political implications, and expressed hope for an objective review of the case.
Mr. Kozlov's sentence seems disproportionate and, given his political activities, seems to carry political overtones. The EU will continue to closely monitor the events in order to motivate the government of Kazakhstan to review the case in accordance with international obligations undertaken by the country.
Members of an independent public commission on Zhanaozen demand to pardon Zhanaozen and Shetpe oil workers. In the words of politician Bulat Abilov, they were expecting the last verdict in the case of the December 2011 events. They will now hold public hearings on October 23rd, where experts from civil society, political parties, and ordinary citizens will take active part. Abilov also noted that not only violations were recorded at the trials in Aktau, but the trial itself was politically motivated as well.
Теперь, когда судебный процесс прошел,
After the trial ended, the authorities want to show that Ablazov, Kozlov and others are guilty of inciting social hatred. But this is nonsense that only our government could come up with. 37 oil workers were convicted for violent unrest, but none of the organizers of these riots were found. While visiting Aktau and Mangistau region on January 21st, the president himself made a stunning statement about young men being paid $135 to cause the unrest. But where are they now?
Prior to carrying out the verdict, the Aktau court sent for analysis case materials on Bulat Atabayev to the General Prosecutor's Office. Judge Murzabekov requested to investigate the legality of charging the well-known stage director with Article 65 and terminating his criminal prosecution. Attorneys have yet to receive any documents on the subject, and journalists attempted to ask Atabayev personally what might be facing the public figure.
Bulat
Atabayev is now in Brussels taking part in the sessions of the European Parliament. He is aware of the prosecution resuming his investigation. Over the phone from Brussels, Atabayev said to reporters that he doesn't have any details on the matter as he hasn't spoken to his lawyer yet. I need to talk to my lawyer and see what she says. She hasn't received any written court notices so far. I suspect that they might arrest me and prevent my abroad travels. The prominent stage director was locked up in the Aktau detention center along with politicians Vladimir Kozlov, Serik Sapargali and public activist Akjanat Aminov. Bulat Atabayev was charged with inciting social hatred and calling to overthrow the constitutional order, yet soon released for the act of repentance. In June, he got out of jail with the help of his filmmaker friend Yermek Tursunov, who managed all talks between the National Security Committee and Atabayev. Back then, a number of social activists followed the example of Tursunov and wrote appeals to the NSC requesting authorization to travel to Aktau as intermediaries in the cases of Vladimir Kozlov, Serik Sapargali, Akjanat Aminov and Janbulat Mamay. Activists asked to study case materials, visit detainees in prison and witness their interrogations. However, all of these requests were ignored. On Wednesday, the press managed to speak to Yermek Tursunov during the pre-release of his latest film, Shal. I don't think I'll be visiting the detention center again. Those 2 weeks in Aktau prison were enough for me. We're friends and we talked. Of course, I'm going to do the best I can, but I cannot be responsible for his every word and action every time he delivers a speech. I believe that an artist should be publicly active, but his creative work is what should really express his public stance. Nevertheless, Bulat Atabayev reported that he is not going to stay abroad trying to avoid the new arrest. He will return to Kazakhstan upon the end of the parliament sessions in Brussels. They just want me to keep my mouth shut, so that I don't stain the reputation of Our Majesty Nazarbayev. For the last few days, I've been receiving a lot of emails and phone calls from people hysterically trying to convince me not to return to Kazakhstan, saying that I will be much more useful free rather than imprisoned. But I already bought my return ticket because I never meant to do this, really. Atabayev's lawyer is yet to find out this Wednesday what does the future hold for his client once he receives a court order.
As mentioned in the story, Yermek Tursunov's motion picture titled Shal is hitting the Kazakh box office. The second installment of the director's trilogy was shown to journalists on Wednesday. The first feature, called Kelin, stirred controversy not only among film aficionados, but in Akorda as well. Viewers are yet to assess its sequel. The third and final movie, called Kenje, will begin filming in 2013.
Да что это такое? Это ты меня так наказываешь, да? С Новым годом, и дрит твою на все 7.
Yermek Tursunov's Shal is based on Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, set in contemporary Kazakhstan. This film is a tribute to the generation that happened to live in a very unfortunate times. All of the key roles were played by non-professional actors, and the audience especially liked Doranbek Maldakhan, the boy who saved his grandfather's life. Many have noted his resemblance to the film director. I've enjoyed working with Yermek during the filming. His earlier film, Kelin, wasn't favored by many, but I like it.
In other news, Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev arrived in Turkey with an official visit on Wednesday night. He flew in from Moscow, where he held a series of meetings with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The presidents went to the theater and made a joint statement. Thus, the heads of states marked the 20th anniversary of friendship between Kazakhstan and Russia. More in the next story.
The main topic of Nursultan Nazarbayev's meeting with Vladimir Putin is the customs union. Over the last few years, the two leaders have met so often to discuss it that it seems like there is nothing else left to talk about, say the experts jokingly. That joke was somewhat truthful after all. Officially, the two presidents voiced well-known facts. We are thinking about renewing this big agreement, adopting it to current needs, and developing it further in the creation of a united economic space. That terseness provoked mystery and created a series of assumptions about the real purpose of the visit in Moscow. The first one suggests that this meeting finalized Putin's tour around Central Asia. Here's the quote from his speech to support it. To discuss the issues related to further integration and extension of the integration not only between our two countries, but throughout the territory of the former Soviet Union in general. We will have a great opportunity to celebrate our anniversary events today and to discuss these issues in more detail tonight during the informal talks. They appeared almost on time at a concert on the new stage of the large theater. It was unexpected to see the former Prime Minister Daniel Akhmetov next to the President of Kazakhstan. He was not in the picture previously, even though he is in charge of the energy resources in the Eurasian Commission. Having such a person in a circle again, plus the latest exclusive interview of Nursultan Nazarbayev to the First Channel, adds up to a new version of the visit, which is very controversial. Yes, it was evident that he did not look well. Perhaps it is some kind of arthrosis or something else. However, it is too early to bury the politician of such a level. Even if he came to talk about and introduce his successor to Russian colleagues, there is nothing out of line. There are plenty of rumors in regard to Nazarbayev's disease, but as you can see, he is working and seems to be just fine. Let's forget about this for the next 5 years. Nazarbayev is not even contemplating of a successor. These are just our own wishes and assumptions. Complete nonsense. First of all, Putin is 60 years old. Nazarbayev paid him a visit as an old friend to congratulate him in person. However, all of this is only speculation. The real purpose of the visit is to promote the customs union, and it is still a keynote despite the fact that not everyone in Kazakhstan itself supports the idea. Any union that does not satisfy the demands of the country is not durable. It is only held on the shoulders of the so-called ruling elite. Meanwhile, the integration is underway. Nursultan Nazarbayev personally met with the head of Lukoil, Vagit Alikperov. They have been cooperating in the oil sector of Kazakhstan for a long time. The president brought along the Olympic champions to share experiences with Russian athletes. To top it off, the Eurasian First Channel broadcasted that a new subway station named Almatinskaya will appear as a gift to the president of Kazakhstan, despite the protest of local residents.
Italian furniture, clothes, pasta, and cheese. These are the country's signature goods that will soon arrive in Kazakhstan, announced foreign entrepreneurs looking for partners to create joint ventures on Wednesday's Business Forum. Italian ambassador to Kazakhstan, Alberto Pieri, noted that exports from Kazakhstan to Italy rose by 50% from the start of the year.
Italian entrepreneurs spoke of the cooperation possibilities between the two countries as they plan to work in 7 areas: food, furniture, textiles, luxury goods, construction, engineering, as well as oil and gas. Italy already takes part in the Kashagan project and now plans to build oil refineries and a pipeline in Kazakhstan. We have to understand that we're living in the time of the oil boom and the mentality is changing. We're here and ready to invest into the future, and we're planning to lose some money short term in order to be a part of the oil projects in the future.
Also on Wednesday, State Secretary Mukhtar Kul-Mohammed amply criticized the country's customs office. Despite the national leader's demand to eradicate bribery, corruption in Majlis Baev's agency is still rampant, noted Kul-Mohammed during a meeting of the Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission.
The State Secretary referred to the notorious case of Horgos as an example. According to Kul-Mohammed, law enforcement agencies were found to be frequently involved in criminal operations. As a consequence, 192 criminal cases were initiated against officials of the Customs Committee. This, however, failed to drastically change the situation. According to the State Secretary, corruption levels in Majid Baev's department are absolutely outrageous.
Уровень коррупции в стране снижается очень медленно.
The corruption level in our country is declining very slowly. The customs authorities are the worst perpetrators. Corruption environment is thriving there, and it can be even compared to a real industry.
Смело можно назвать даже целой индустрией.
In other news, not one but two government agencies at once offered solutions regarding loans to the population. The parliament requested not to penalize those who pay off their loans early, while the National Bank is convinced loans should not be taken at all. More details next from the capital.
During Wednesday's plenary session, MP Tursunbek Murzakov asked banks on behalf of all communists to stop penalizing citizens of the country. The parliamentarians want to see financial institutions prohibited to apply penalties against people choosing to pay off their loans early. In case of early loan payment in just a year, the banks can apply fines. But is it right to penalize a person who pays off before the end of the loan term? Murzakov's question was addressed to the chairman of the National Bank, Grigory Marchenko, who in turn also spoke about loans that many citizens are grown so used to. Marchenko said that clients can be divided in three groups. Some take the loan and can't pay it on time because of the force majeure circumstances. Others weren't planning to pay the loan from the start. The third group just doesn't understand all the risks involved. Clearly, people could buy cheaper phones without taking loans instead of trying to impress their friends. In many cases, we're talking about getting into debt bondage, since the entire family budget will go to pay off loans for plasma TVs and other consumer goods that the family could have lived without. At the beginning of 2012, the amount of credits issued to private clients in Kazakhstan reached over $17 billion. While the head of the National Bank hasn't answered the MP inquiry yet, it is already clear that the early repayment is not beneficial for banks. Not only it lowers expected revenue, but also adds the workload on interest recalculation.
What do you do with 6.6 million abandoned US dollars in the state pension fund? An entire debate unfolded in Parliament on this subject on Wednesday. Should the money be given to state coffers, or should they wait for its real owners to turn up? The fate of the national savings in the next story.
The former head of the Audit Committee and a current member of the lower house of Parliament, Omarkhan Oksikbayev, announced that 6.6 million US dollars were found abandoned in the state pension fund. The deputy proposes to transfer unreported dividends to the state budget fund. The issue can be solved by legal regulations. According to the accounting records law, money that has been abandoned for more than 3 years is transferred to the state budget fund. In our case, the owner of this money has not been found yet. It is doubtful whether he will be found at all. At the same time, dividends of that money go to the account of the state pension fund. I propose to legalize the transfer of the dividends to the state budget fund. However, Minister of Labor and Social Security Serik Abdenov said it was too early to define the money as abandoned. Dividends are supposed to have their owner. Moreover, the law on the protection of private savings has not been cancelled. But the speech of the youngest minister was interrupted. Chairman of the upper house of Parliament, Nurlan Nigmatulin, responded by teaching a lesson of good behavior in the Parliament. Well, Serip Sapkuldauli, it is the first time you have to come to the parliament as minister. You probably do not know when asked a question you should give a brief answer. It was such an easy question. Money is abandoned. What if we transfer it to the state budget fund? The answer must be the following. There is not any relevant legislation, but it will be developed. That is all. And you take your seat. On this note, the two newcomers' discussion regarding a curious issue was over. The announced sum is so impressive that many Kazakh people are interested in further steps of the government regarding people's savings, especially in times of crisis when every penny counts.
In other news, Pavlodar's public transportation workers intend to sue the city administration. Local authorities are slow to react to the carrier's request to raise transportation fees. Businessmen say they are unable to keep generating losses from work and are not prepared to litigate. Our reporters covered the officials' reaction to their ultimatum.
City transportation companies are ready to take the matter to court in order for the authorities to approve the raise of bus fares, which remain the same for the last 2 years. We are trying to fulfill all obligations listed in our contracts, but in recent years it has been quite hard to do it due to some objective reasons. First of all, last year the cost of spares has increased by a rate of 50 to 120%. I'm not even talking about the price of fuel, which rose over 20% during the same period. To cover the costs, companies ask the authorities to approve at least a 20% increase of fares. Otherwise, the matter will be taken to court. Officials seem unfazed by the prospect, but look into the request anyway. If they want to sue us, they can go right ahead. However, we are currently working on this matter and the mayor is reviewing the issue. It is quite possible that he will look for a compromise with the transportation companies. The news of a possible rise of bus fares was not taken well by Pavlodar residents, who are outraged by the fact that public services and transportation is getting expensive each year while their budgets remain the same. I think that with these wages, it would be quite a burden for the working class. It would be especially tough with increasing fares. Of course, it would be quite expensive, not only for pensioners, but also for everyone. Demands of transportation companies seem reasonable, just like passengers' desire to keep bus fares at the same level. However, it is clear that someone will have to suffer in the end, regardless of the decision taken by the authorities.
In the town of Kulsari, Atara region, residents of a high-rise building are living out of their suitcases. The building which they resided in for only a few years began falling apart before their eyes. People are scared and fear the same fate as Bisoba residents in Karaganda. They return to their apartments only at night, having nowhere else to sleep. In the meantime, officials have been slow to recognize the building in its state of emergency.
I'm ready to die every single night. I'm afraid to sleep on my back. Instead, I sleep sideways because if the concrete slab falls on me, it wouldn't kill me right away and I don't want to suffer long. I prefer an instant death. The governor paid us a visit but did nothing. He lives in a villa and sleeps tight. On Tuesday, the block tenants managed to attract the attention of officials by a mere accident. The governor of the region visited the area on personal business. That's when the scandal emerged. The official was inclined to take a look at the failing building, but he didn't realize that the situation is quite serious and promised to provide people with new housing, although not specifying when. Visually, it's obvious that the house is in poor state, but an expert evaluation is still required to make it official, which in turn will take about $13,000 of the budget funds. If the building doesn't pass the inspection, we will be urgently evicting its tenants and settle them in hostels. The tenants are not really excited about such outcome either, because it's not clear for how long they will have to stay in hostels. Kulsari residents most likely will be surviving through the upcoming winter in their collapsing apartment block. As an alternative to such scenario and the official suggestions, people are now planning to set up a tent camp next to the city administration office.
Finally, the Russian pop diva Zhanna Frisky will be immortalized in stone by a sculptor from Pavlodar region. Kamal Sagidenov from KplusTV began sculpting the monument in hopes that his work will adorn one of the city streets.
The unprofessional sculptor has already managed to impress city residents with his creativity. One of his infamous works is the sculpture of Soviet movie star Evgeny Leonov near the entrance to a local cafe. Kamal Sagidenov hopes that the new sculpture of Russian pop singer Zhanna Frisky will create a stronger reaction. The local authorities are skeptical about the work, but Sagidenov doesn't seem to care, as he's simply doing what he likes to do most. I liked her from the first moment I saw her perform as part of a Блестящие girls band. I'm not a big fan of such music, but she's certainly a very beautiful woman and I'm very much attracted to her. I adore her.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.